Fun facts, I really love Indiana Jones. A lot of you probably know that I went through film school, and something you learn very quickly is that there's a lot of great movies out there, and there are a lot of well-made movies out there. And Indiana Jones fits into both categories, especially Raiders of the Lost Ark. Just fantastic movie, beautiful. I love it so much. Now, in the 2026 predictions video that I recently did, I got a lot of reaction to the idea of an Indiana Jones omnibus coming out later this year. That was my big prediction. And a lot of people were asking me about that. What's up with that? Why is that such a big deal? And I kind of wanted to break down the history of Indiana Jones comic books, what they are, how great they actually are, and why we really need to get them recollected in a format like an omnibus, or maybe Marvel's Epic Collection, something like that. So the Indiana Jones series, very much like the Star Wars series, is the result of the movie being released. A few years prior to it, Marvel was able to get the license to do comic books for Star Wars, and this was huge. This saved Marvel in a big way because the book was just really successful, and it provided the first few stories that took place outside of the movie but included the same characters, which that's a big deal. And especially like in the late 70s, home release wasn't nearly as prevalent as it would become later. So honestly, having a comic book adaptation that released alongside the movie and was fairly new to the movie, that was probably the best way you could take the movie home with you and re-experience it, was through picking up the comic book. Since Marvel was able to get the Star Wars license a few years earlier, they already had like the bridge built, so they were able to get the Indiana Jones license, and they started making comics. The first thing they did was an adaptation of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders was a 3-issue series. It didn't go on as long as A New Hope did. A New Hope went on for like 6 issues, but it adapted the story really well, and it did some really interesting things. Famously, the Raiders of the Lost Ark comic book actually has some extra stuff in it that you don't see in the movie, which, I mean, you would kind of hope that you would get that anyway. If you're watching the movie and you're reading the comic book, you kind of want to have a reason to see both, and having different content between the two is a good way to do it. But this was cool. This was an artifact of just how they made movie adaptations at the time. Typically, they would be provided the script, and they would be provided like pictures of the characters to use, and that's basically what you got. So some of the things that showed up in the script for Raiders that were then cut from the movie later on, they still made it into the comic book. And see, that was cool. And later on we would get adaptations from Marvel Comics of Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade as well. The Last Crusade, actually, that one got a couple. There's a couple of different versions out there. The version I have is the magazine format. It's in black and white, and it's a little bit bigger, but it's essentially the same thing. What's really cool, though, is not the movie adaptations. The movie adaptations are cool. What am I talking about? Those are cool. But Marvel continued the story in The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones. The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones is 34 issues that takes place between Raiders of the Lost Ark and then like the next handful of years after that. In storyline, it was released in 1983 and ended in 1986. Now, what's really interesting about this series is it kind of shows a pattern that we see in Indiana Jones franchise stuff outside of the movies. Well, the 5th movie kind of delved into that a bit, and the 4th did a little bit as well. But outside of the movies, you play the video games or you read the comic book, and Indiana Jones's adventures are like way more fantastical. It also gives Marion Ravenwood a few more things to do in these 34 issues. Like, she shows up in Raiders, then she disappears for the next 2 movies, then she shows up in Indiana Jones 4, and then a little bit in 5. And it's like, okay, cool, but like she actually does stuff in the comic book series, which is kind of fun and kind of exciting. My experience collecting this book has been a long process. It's taken a while to do it. Every time I go to a new comic shop or I go to my LCS, my local comic shop, I'm always looking to see if I can find it and I'm really close. I have almost all of it. I am missing a couple. There's a couple of gaps in there that I'm missing. But it seriously took me years to get this, which is the biggest reason why I really want to see this collected in an omnibus, is because it's hard to find them otherwise. These are just really, really popular books that a lot of people like, and they don't stay on shelves or in comic book bins for very long. They're usually picked up pretty quickly. It's only 34 issues, but it's kind of been a feat to try and get all 34 issues out in the wild. Yeah, you probably have to go onto the internet and order them individually, and ordering comic books secondhand on the internet is a lot more expensive than you would expect it to be. So that's probably the biggest reason, is that it hasn't been collected anywhere and it's hard to find out in the wild. But you know what's just about as hard as that? Finding all of the books from the 90s. Dark Horse Comics, they picked up the Star Wars, and with it they got the Indiana Jones license in 1991, and they started just going ham with all of it. They did some very, very cool stuff. They made a ton of different Star Wars series, and then when they were working with Indiana Jones, rather than give him one specific ongoing series, they gave him a bunch of mini-series. These mini-series covered one full, complete story that lasted, 6 to 8-ish issues maybe between them all, which I think is really the right format for Indiana Jones. You watch the movie and it's like cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger with all of these scenes. It was based off of old movie serials and old comic books of very similar adventurers doing that. So like it has the right pedigree for comics, but especially the right pedigree for a miniseries. So you can find all of them on individual issues, but I found the easiest way for me to collect them anyway was I found the old Dark Horse Omnibus. This isn't exactly what I was talking about before. It is a name, but it's a little bit different. The Dark Horse Omnibus collections, they collected all of the mini-series of Indiana Jones through this. And probably the most famous mini-series that they did was an adaptation of the point-and-click adventure puzzle game, The Fate of Atlantis. I've played The Fate of Atlantis, the video game. It's not my favorite. I'm not a huge fan of the whole point-and-click thing, and also some of the puzzles you could tell were just kind of being a little bit silly. And it wasn't my thing, but you know what is? The comic book is so good. Oh my goodness. Oh, it's a good comic. It's dark, it's gritty, it's serious, the art is gorgeous, and like the coloring is this beautiful, it almost looks penciled in. It almost looks like they're using colored pencils, but not quite. There's a little bit of digital art happening, but not so much that it's distracting. There's adventure and action every minute. The characters are exciting and engaging. I love the new characters that they introduce. It's a good mini-series, and it's an example of just what Indiana Jones can do in comic books. As time went on, they kept making these mini-series, and they're out there. You can collect them. They are kind of difficult because they kind of have the same problem that Further Adventures has, where everybody wants it, and there's not enough to go around. Also, the other tricky part is that since it was a bunch of mini-series and they all had different titles, you look up Indiana Jones #1 and you're going to get a bunch of different ones. And it's kind of hard to keep straight just exactly how many of these there were. But it shows just like how great the medium of comics really is for Indiana Jones. And it's just modern enough to where it feels like it could still be a newer-ish comic. Like it's unique art. It's not art that we see very often now, but the story pacing is right there, the art is right there, the layouts are right there. They're really good, but they are really hard to find. Again, that's why I'm saying it would be nice if we could get an omnibus that collected all of this together so that people could see these and read them and enjoy them in a real way without having to, go to nasty parts of the internet to try and find them or pay way too much for the secondhand market. And then we run into another problem with the Indiana Jones franchise, which is that for some reason that I can't figure out, and I haven't been able to find anyone else who can properly explain it, the character has a hard time staying in the green as far as sales and relevancy goes. And then came the year 1992. Now, this isn't going to surprise anyone who is familiar with the works of one George Lucas, but he was really interested in trying out writing prequel stories to characters. In fact, Temple of Doom was a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like, he's been thinking about it for a long time. And one of the first projects he did as a prequel was the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, which Dark Horse adapted in 1992. Now, the thing you gotta know about the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles is that it's enjoyable. I liked it. It's not the same as the movies, especially the first few episodes. They're not very action-packed. It's a lot of Indiana Jones as a fairly young child going around the world while his dad is speaking at various universities and establishments across the world, and he just learns stuff. Like, that's all he does for the first few episodes. And Dark Horse decided to adapt the first episodes in a series. It only went on for 6 issues, which means it didn't even get to the part of the show that the show got good in. Later on, it's actually referenced in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. He runs away from home, accidentally joins Pancho Villa's gang, and then leaves Pancho Villa's gang to become a spy during World War I. And that was cool. Like, Indiana Jones did some really cool stuff in that series, and it's a great continuation if you want more Indiana Jones. It's just the first few episodes really are kind of slow, and so unfortunately the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles kind of suffered from adapting the slow episodes. And then they just kind of took a break from making Indiana Jones comics for a while until we get into the 2000s, where we got 2 notable additions to Indiana Jones comics. We got Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the official adaptation of it, which isn't bad. It's a little bit rushed, but it's not bad. And then the Indiana Jones Adventures, which was drawn in the art style of Clone Wars Adventures, which was drawn in the art style of Clone Wars, which was drawn in the style of Samurai Jack, which was drawn in the style of everything else on Cartoon Network. So that's kind of cool. And then notably, in 2009, we got the final installment of Indiana Jones and the Tomb of the Gods. Tomb of the Gods is a lot of fun. It's a 4-issue miniseries, and I mentioned that the older Dark Horse miniseries, their art was, I'm not going to say old because it's not, it's unique, it's different. We don't typically see art like that in comic books, but Tomb of the Gods was very trendy. It looks like a comic book, it reads like a comic book, but the humor is right for Indiana Jones. There's a certain element of humor to all of the action that's going on. The swordsman with this swinging swords, and Indiana Jones just takes care of it. It's funny, it's entertaining, and that kind of silliness is part of the action, and Tomb of the Gods really encompasses that well. But you know what the problem is? That was the last time we saw Indiana Jones in a comic book, and that was in 2009. Like, holy cow. It has been a very, very long time since we've had an Indiana Jones comic, a new story that way. It's almost been 20 years. Not quite. I'm not going to give us that. It's been a little bit more than 15 years, though, since we've had Indiana Jones show up in a comic book, which is a real shame because, dare I to say, I think I do dare to say, Indiana Jones's quality in stories is better in his comic books than it has been in his movies. The movies are masterpieces. They're great. I find reasons to love all of them. But the comic books are just a whole other level, and because they are comics, you can stretch things a little bit. Indiana Jones can always look like Indiana Jones. You could put as many adventures as you want in between the space of Raiders and The Last Crusade, and no one's going to blink because it's a comic book. It just kind of makes sense. It's a great way to continue this character, and I find comic books are a great way to continue a lot of things. Now, there's a lot of conversation that goes around, especially after a big movie releases and like old characters show up and they're like, oh, this is cool. It's cool that we got Tobey Maguire to show up again in a movie. Can we get another movie with him? And it's like, probably not, because that's really complicated. There's no reason why we can't have Spider-Man 4 as a comic book, though. There's no reason why we can't continue The Amazing Spider-Man 3 as a comic book. And I think it's an interesting and real option that should be considered, especially by these studios that want to keep these legacy characters alive. And as far as Indiana Jones is concerned, you know, the Great Circle did a lot for the character. I think a comic book could do a lot of good for him as well. Problem is, though, you have to prove that. And I get that. You know, there's just as much marketing and just as much market research in comic books as there is just making the book fun and engaging. So, this is why I'm saying we should get an omnibus volume, you know. Get as much as you can, packed it into, you know, a big old book, and then sell it. Because Indiana Jones has been stated to be one of the top requested omnibus volumes at Marvel. Marvel gets a list of like requests and things that people are interested in. Indiana Jones is near the top right now because people really want it. And it's like I said, the fact that it's taking years to find all of these issues means that it is popular, that people do want this. So here's what I'm saying. Release an omnibus. Alongside the omnibus, go ahead and release an epic collection that costs a lot less and covers maybe half of the continuing adventures, or maybe the epic collection just collects the movie adaptations, you know. It's something really safe. Get the big book for people who really want the big book, get the smaller book for the people who just want to dip their toes in. Check it out. The sales are going to work. People are going to care. People are going to buy these books and love them. And after they do, maybe we can continue the character this way. Because if adventure has a name, it's Indiana Jones. And if adventure has a favorite place to be, it's in comic books. It just feels like the match made in heaven, you know? Anyway, that's what I got for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed kind of this brief rundown of Indiana Jones and this character and why he's so interesting in comic books. If you learned something cool or you have any thoughts about like what was brought up, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. And until next time, thank you for joining me. Have a great day, and remember to always be your best self.